Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a story that's, well, it's really captivating, to say the least. We're talking about Jim and Tammy Faye Baker.
Oh, yeah. The Bakers. Their story is a wild ride, that's for sure.
It is. And, I think a lot of people know the basics, but there's so much more to it than just the headlines, right?
Absolutely. It's a story about faith, ambition, scandal, and it's all tied up with this very specific moment in American history, the rise of cable TV and televangelism.
Exactly. So we're going to take a deep dive into their journey from their early days as traveling evangelists to the heights of their fame and fortune with PTL, and of course, their very public downfall.
Should be interesting.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. Jim Baker's childhood, before he became the Jim Baker.
Right, before the TV personality, before the PTL empire.
He had pretty ordinary upbringing, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Not from a particularly religious family. I think he even said once that he only went to church because his dad made him.
Really? So what changed? What was that turning point for him?
Well, there was this pretty significant incident when he was a teenager. He accidentally hit a young boy with his car.
Oh, wow. That's a heavy thing for anyone to go through, let alone a teenager.
It was. Thankfully, the boy survived, but for Jim, it was a profound experience. He saw it as a divine miracle, a sign from God.
So that was the catalyst for his religious awakening.
It seems that way, yeah. He goes from this reluctant churchgoer to this passionate, driven evangelist almost overnight.
And then he meets Tammy Faye, right? It's like a whirlwind romance.
Oh, yeah. Straight out of a movie, they meet at Bible college, elope, drop out, and hit the road, preaching the gospel using puppets.
Puppets. I mean,
Yes,
come on, that's pretty innovative for the time, right?
definitely. They were really trying to reach a younger audience to make religion fun and accessible. They were pioneers in that sense.
And that's what caught the attention of Pat Robertson, who was just starting out with CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
Yeah. CBN gave them a platform, a chance to reach a much wider audience, and they really took off from there. Tammy Faye with her singing, and Jim with his unique fundraising abilities.
Ah, yes. The infamous telethon.
hmm
The one where he basically claimed CBN was about to go bankrupt if people didn't donate.
It was a bit of an exaggeration, to say the least, but it worked. The donations poured in.
So they were becoming stars, their lifestyles getting more lavish. And CBN, well, they weren't exactly thrilled about it.
No, there were definitely some tensions. CBN was trying to run a tight ship, but Jim felt like he was entitled to certain perks. He was convinced that he was the reason for their success.
And that led to that confrontation with Pat Robertson, right?
Yeah, Robertson was like a mentor to Jim, but he had to step in and say, hey, this spending is out of control.
Yeah. And you can see that even then, there's this clash between Jim's ambition, his desire for control, and the mission of the ministry.
Exactly. He wasn't content with being just another face on CBN. He had bigger plans.
Plans that would eventually lead them to break away from CBN and create their own empire.
An empire that would, for a time, become the envy of the televangelism world. Yeah, Jim Bakker, he wanted to do things his way, and I guess he felt like he couldn't do that at CBN.
So they pack their bags and head down to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Right. And that's where PTL was born.
Praise the Lord. Their own network, their own show, the PTL Club. They were everywhere.
And with cable TV taking off, they could reach way more people than ever before. I mean, they were a true power couple in the televangelism world.
But Jim, he always had to dream bigger, didn't he? Enter Heritage USA?
Oh, yeah, Heritage USA. His grand vision, a Christian theme park, a resort, a whole broadcasting center. I mean, talk about ambitious.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And expensive. You'd think with all the financial trouble they had at CBN, he'd be a little more cautious.
Well, some people definitely tried to warn him. Larry Hall, he was on the board at PTL, and he had a lot of experience in business, you know?
So he must have been seeing some red flags with all the spending on Heritage USA.
Right, he was worried. But Jim, he was convinced that God would provide. He saw it as a test of faith, you know?
I mean, faith is one thing, but you got to be practical too, right?
Yeah, I think that's where things started to unravel. It's like he couldn't see the difference between faith and just plain bad financial decisions.
And then on top of all that, the FCC starts investigating them.
Oh, yeah, the feds got involved. They were looking into how PTL was using their money, specifically donations that were supposed to go to international missions.
And that's where Bill Perkins comes in, right? He was a former executive at PTL.
Yep. And he blew the whistle, basically. Testified that they were using mission money to cover their operating costs, you know, keeping the lights on.
So they're building this massive theme park, hemorrhaging money, and now the government is breathing down their necks. Not a good situation.
No, not at all. It was a recipe for disaster. And then, of course, you have the Just Han allegations.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is. That's where things get really messy, really complicated.
Okay, so this Jessica Hahn thing, it's pretty serious stuff, right?
Yeah, it's a really dark chapter in their story. Back in 1980, Jessica Hahn, she was a young church secretary. She accused Jim Backer of sexual assault.
So it's not just about money anymore. This is a whole different level of scandal.
Right. And what made it even worse was how they handled it. They tried to cover it up, paid her hush money.
Hush money. They were using ministry funds for that.
Yeah. Which is, completely illegal. They were basically buying her silence with money that was supposed to be used for charitable purposes.
Wow, that's a huge betrayal of trust.
It was, and it all came crashing down eventually. The cover-up, the financial problems, the FCC investigation, it all just imploded.
And PTL filed for bankruptcy.
In 1987, yeah. And Jim Baker resigned. He had no choice at that point.
It's amazing how quickly it all fell apart. They went from being on top of the world to, well, to nothing.
It really is. And, their story is not just about them. It's about this whole era in American culture. The rise of televangelism, the influence of the religious right. It's all intertwined.
Yeah, they were like the poster children for that whole movement.
And it makes you think about the role of faith, the dangers of power, the importance of accountability. It's a cautionary tale for sure.
So what happened to them after PTL collapsed?
Well, Jim Backer, he ended up facing criminal charges for fraud.
Yeah, all those financial shenanigans.
Right. He was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison.
45 years. Wow.
I know, it's a long time. His sentence was reduced later on, and he ended up serving 5 years. But his reputation was, well, pretty much destroyed.
And Faye.
She and Jim got divorced in 92 while he was still in prison. She actually went on to have her own career, talk shows, books, documentaries.
Oh, really? So she was able to rebuild her life after all that?
It seems so, yeah. She became kind of a pop culture icon. People were drawn to her, I think, because she was so open about her struggles, And she always preached a message of love and acceptance, which really resonated with a lot of folks.
It's interesting how their paths diverged so much.
It is. She chose a path of vulnerability and forgiveness, while Jim Baker, he kind of stayed stuck in this narrative of victimhood,
What do you think is the biggest lesson we can learn from their story? I mean, it's such a complex saga with so many layers to it.
Well, it definitely reminds us that even those who claim to be righteous, they're human, they're going to make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes have huge consequences.
It's also a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers, right?
Yeah,
Especially when it comes to people in positions of power.
absolutely. We can't just blindly follow anyone. We have to hold our leaders accountable and, be aware of how power can be abused, even in the name of faith.
Well said. So I guess the Baker story is one that'll keep us talking for years to come.
It is. It's a story that just keeps on giving.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. What did you find most interesting about the rise and fall of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.